New York has been the center of the baseball world in the 2022 season.
Off to one of the most dominant starts in franchise history, the Yankees can be found no lower than third in all of baseball for homers, RBIs, ERA, and most importantly, wins.
Meanwhile, the Mets, despite their division lead shrinking, have sat in first place in the NL East since April 12th. This sets the stage for the first matchup of the season between the crosstown rivals at Citi Field Tuesday and Wednesday night. I'm Sam Davis, your Mets beat reporter.
I'm Ryan Gregware, your Yankees beat reporter.
And this is a Subway Series preview for WFUV Sports. So Ryan, it's great to be with you here. Obviously, Mets-Yankees starting tomorrow night, 7:10 p.m. Montgomery and Walker, the pitching matchup. Wednesday is game 2. Just a quick 2-game set at Citi Field. We're going to both be there tomorrow, which I don't know about you, but I'm super pumped for. I was telling you earlier that other than in the regular season, other than maybe a Braves series, this is one of the matchups that I'm most looking forward to in a regular season for the Mets.
Oh, this is going to be awesome. Every year as a Yankee fan, Met fan, whoever it may be, you circle the Subway Series, and unfortunately, it's not the 3-game set. It's only 2 and 2. The AL East doesn't match up with the NL East, but these are the games that just add a little more juice because we're at the point and we're getting to the trade deadline, and obviously some big moves are going to probably happen with these teams. It's an exciting time for sure, but you're getting to the dog days just a bit. So having a Subway Series of bragging rights for New York City kind of on the line in a bit, it just means a little more for the regular season.
I want to go through, before we get into the matchups in particular, what both team is, leading into this game, kind of how they're looking. And, starting with the Mets, of course, last night could have been a lot worse than it turned out to be. 0-0 game again. The Mets offense has been really struggling. They had runners on second and third, nobody out, didn't score. The Padres then took the lead in the 6th inning. Brandon Nimmo robs a homer that would have made it 3-0. That really was a huge turning point for the Mets as a whole because offensively, in the bottom of that half inning, they were able to get a big 3-run homer from Pete. They were able to explode for 5 runs, eventually win that one 8-5. It was a huge win, especially because the Braves lost, but it really could have been a turning point for the Mets if they did lose that game. If it was 3-0, with the way that the offense has been struggling, they would have been swept by the Padres, and all of a sudden, that lead was at just a half a game. They don't have, it's not like it's only a game and a half lead now, and it's been a lot bigger at, other times in the season, but it still is nice to have a little bit of more breathing room for the Mets here heading into this 2-game set.
And Sam, you're a few tweaks and things going a little bit differently away than the Mets being in second.
Yeah.
And this specific kind of feature that we're doing, if that was the case, it would be wildly different.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, we'll get into the urgency that is different with this two teams going into the series because there's definitely a different perspective a bit. But for the Mets to get that little bit of a cushion, and the Braves will play Monday night, the Mets have the off day. So we'll see what happens there if it gets down to just a game, if it goes up to 2 games for the Mets. But most importantly, you have a little bit of a cushion here and, just have that breathing room, not go into a game knowing that if you lose, you could be in second for the first time since April. I think that takes a little bit of pressure off the Mets when they've been scuffling just a bit to win that last game, go into the off day. You can almost reset and get into the Subway Series, focused and fresh.
I don't know if you can call, looking at the Yankees now, I don't know if you can even say they're struggling right now. You'll have the best word for that. They just won 2 out of 3 from an Orioles team that actually has been playing really well lately, 6-0 winner on Sunday. So Ryan, with the Yankees, I don't think you can say they're struggling, but the pace they're at is a little bit different than they were when they were just beating everyone.
Yeah, it's not going to be the 120-win team. It's not going to be probably the 110-win team. They've actually just got jumped by the Dodgers for the best winning percentage in baseball, and it's like 681 to 680. So it's obviously, you're looking at the margins here, but things I think have changed a bit. The Yankees are not this team that is just going to steamroll everyone. It showed going into the second half. You lose a doubleheader in Houston. You fall to 2-5 on the season versus the Astros, and you can go back in the history books, see when they beat the Astros in the regular season, they lost to them in the playoffs. So, I'm not even looking at that as a freak-out thing when I say they're struggling. It's just you lose a series to the Reds as well right before the All-Star break. It's inconsistent baseball because they lose that series, then they take 2 or 3 by the Red Sox and beat them by 100 the last 2 games. And then, you get swept in a doubleheader.
Yeah, I love hearing how, a little reminder there of that Red Sox series.
I had to
throw it in there.
Go back in time just a bit. But you're 5-5 in your last 10. That's a 500, so that's not the 700 winning percentage you've been playing at all year. and they're only a game and a half up on the Astros for the best record in the AL. So I think that's where your attention turns if you're the Yankees, and the urgency isn't even close to as the Mets in terms of your division, because the Yankees and Astros will get those 2 byes. So you're not looking at that, but at the same time, you want to separate yourself. You want home field as long in the playoffs as possible. So you go into it. The Blue Jays have won 6 in a row. You're 12 and a half up on them. Obviously, it's too early to panic about the division whatsoever because, again, you're playing 500 baseball. So I guess when you're struggling and you're still winning every other game, that's a positive. But you want the Yankees, and with what you've seen lately, to kind of get back to where they're just sweeping every team and just blowing everyone out of the water. I think we talked about it too when they were on that, peak stretch. You're like, you didn't even check. You just knew that they were going to win every day. And that's what you want the Yankees to get back to because you've seen they can do it over a long stretch.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sense of urgency with the Mets is obviously more heading into this Subway Series here than it is with the Yankees, just because of obviously, like you mentioned, the division and how close that is. But the Yankees, I think there is a sense of urgency with them as well. I think it is very important for them. It's important for their confidence to get back to playing the game, the way that they have been playing a little bit earlier in the year. And, who knows if that pace is, reasonable to keep up. And I think, maybe recently in the way that the Yankees have been playing is proving that that pace is really difficult to keep over 162. You're going to have a little bit of a peak and valley there. But I think the Houston, going back to Houston, that's concerning for them. Obviously, that's a potential matchup down the road for the playoffs. So that's certainly concerning for the Yankees. But I want to jump into, first looking at this from the offensive side of things and the offensive side of the ball. And for the Mets, it has been really bad lately. In May, they were, second in hits, second in hits and average, first in RBIs, near the top in a lot of offensive categories in the month of May. They had a really good month of May. Meanwhile, in June, they were way down near the bottom, 23rd in average, 27th in hits, 25th in RBIs. So they really went from, in 1 month, the top to the bottom. Now they're kind of sitting around the middle of baseball in terms of what they've done so far in July. But it is not an offensive showing. It has definitely decreased from what we saw earlier in the year for the New York Mets. And I think to point to, a potential issue for this is you could easily point to the lack of power, the lack of ability to hit that home run ball. Obviously, the Yankees do a really good job at that. But it puts a lot of pressure on runners in scoring position, especially with 2 outs and getting that big hit. And, that's not always something that the Mets can rely on. And I think that, in baseball in general, it's going to show that at times you're going to have points in the season where you're just not going to get that big hit. And when you can rely on a homer to really flip the game and obviously put a couple quick runs right up on the board, the Mets can't really do that. And I think that makes this a little bit of concerning for the Mets in the standpoint that, come playoff time, or come a big series against the Braves, you worry that this Mets lineup is going to go through something they're going through right now, where they just kind of fall off the face of the earth. And that's not something you want, obviously. So early on, in June especially, I think, the Braves were winning every single game, so obviously that division lead was going to shrink. But the worry wasn't as much with the Mets and how they were playing. But now, as things continue and as the offense continues to kind of struggle, you're getting to that point of worry with this lineup. And I think at this point, you might need to look towards, sort of making a change there at the deadline because of that.
And you said they can't do it. Well, Pete Alonso can. And
Yeah.
outside of him, no one can.
Yeah.
So you have the one guy who's really, you saw yesterday, the 3-run homer.
Yep.
When you're down 1-0. You have that ability from him, but then there's no one else. And that's what you talk about when you go from month to month and the inconsistencies. That is where that comes from when you don't have the consistent power source. And the Mets, they're going to be aggressive. The reports are right now Josh Bell is a big target.
Yep.
That, they have an offered trade package that I'm sure you'll get into a bit, or we talked about the other day, whatever that may be. But you look at what this offense can be, and you go back to those months where they were hitting the baseball, and it was the Braves are winning every game, but we're still taking 2 or 3 every time. Well, that was less of a concern. But then when it flipped to where you're just begging for runs, and you're not getting them outside of a Pete Alonso homer, and hopefully, cross your fingers, you have a guy on base, that is where it's concerning. It's been something all year where we've talked about, can they get by all season, 162 games, with just one big power source? And it's looking like that answer is no. I don't personally think that, you go long-term this division. I think you're going to need another power guy. I don't think Pete Alonso, and he'll hit 40 and drive in 110, but I don't know if him individually doing that is enough to withstand the Braves, because they can attack you from a ton of different angles. This series versus the Yankees, they can hit you 1 through 5 with 30 homer power. So that is where this series, and you talk about the contrast going into it, the Yankees are so power-oriented, first in the league in homers, 165. That's never a concern with them. For the Mets, I think that probably is the number one concern.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's really the contrast offensively in this series. It's a contrast every time they play the Braves as well because they hit a lot of homers. It's really that difference in power, and I think that can make a big difference in games. And like you said, with the New York Yankees, kind of 1 through 5, a lot of guys that can hurt you in a bunch of different ways. Obviously, that's led by Aaron Judge on a historic pace in terms of home run hitting at a bunch against the Baltimore this past weekend. But this Yankees lineup has a lot of guys that can hurt you in a big way.
And his stat line, Aaron Judge versus the Orioles, in that 3-game series, 8 for 13, 3 homers, 8 RBIs.
Yeah,
he was just hitting the ball everywhere. The offense wasn't even too sharp outside of him, especially in that stretch. Honestly, Giancarlo Stanton, something to watch in this series though. Sam, he's only started 2 of the 5 games post All-Star break. He's dealing with some type of soreness. Hasn't started the last 2 games. We know he had a homer in the All-Star game. I don't know if that plays any role into it, but Aaron Boone has been super cautious with him, so it's
because the Yankees haven't really had any major injury concerns until very recently. You're starting to see some, all of a sudden, and I think Stanton is a huge injury concern with how well that he's been playing this year. Obviously, All-Star MVP, but that's kind of just started to come up out of nowhere for the Yankees as well, which is definitely concerning for them.
So they're being beyond cautious with him, and to what you're alluding to, it's Mike King's injury because the bullpen for the Yankees had been just nasty, and Clay Holmes in the 9th, Mike King, in the 8th was just a guarantee. He fractures his elbow in Game 1 versus the Orioles. The Yankees win that game, and it feels like a huge loss. Like, the score doesn't matter whatsoever. He's out for this season. That's your second-best reliever. So, in another area where I think you go back a week, Yankees definitely had the advantage in the bullpen. It's not as much of a advantage now because the 9th inning is basically a wash with Edwin and Clay. Those are 2 all-star top 5 closers.
Those guys, if you have a lead and you're in the 9th inning, you're in this 2-game set, you're going to win almost every time with those 2 guys.
So it's about getting there in this particular series, and you want to shift things to the pitching side. In the starting, at least, realm, the Mets by far have the advantage in this specific 2-game set.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we mentioned the contrast hitting-wise and how it's, obviously in terms of power numbers, and I would say in general right now it definitely favors the Yankees. But on the other side with pitching, it will definitely favor the Mets, both, not only just these 2 starters. Obviously Montgomery's been pretty good, but struggled against the Mets at times. And Herman is, I know you were all fired up about that move and questioning that decision, which I don't blame you, against Max Scherzer. I mean, there's one guy that has a serious advantage in that pitching matchup. We all know who that is. But the Mets, I mean, starting pitching has been phenomenal. That's the positive you can say. With the negative of the bats, they set a franchise record with 2 earned runs or fewer in 14 straight games from the starters. I mean, 1.58 ERA since July 7th. So the starters have been unbelievable. It's not just Scherzer. It's not, and Walker's been really good. Even Carrasco had a great start last night. You go up and down. Bassett has been good as well recently. And you're still missing DeGrom. So the fact that this pitching staff has been that good without Jacob DeGrom is unbelievable. Taijuan Walker, looking more specifically at him, getting the ball tomorrow. He's given up 4 runs in his last 4 starts dating back to June. So he's been really good. He also works really deep into games, which I think is huge with the fact that
series,
exactly with the Mets bullpen being kind of another area of concern a little bit outside of Edwin Diaz. It's important to work deep. Walker has had 8 starts in a row of at least 6 innings, so that's been really big for Taijuan Walker. Expect him to kind of work deep into that game Tuesday, which I think will be a good pitching matchup against Montgomery for sure for the Yanks.
So Montgomery, actually, if we want to flash back, Sam, because I thought this was the matchup, and it was when we covered last year, July 3rd, Yankees-Mets.
It was us covering?
Matchup. Yes, it was me and you.
That's so funny.
The only other time we've
Same
covered
exact
a game
matchup.
together.
Wow.
Same exact pitching matchup. Wow. And you remember Taijuan Walker, I was miserable that day. Yankees felt like a game above 500.
Montgomery got hit hard.
Rocked.
Yeah.
And he's been rocked versus the Mets. He's a 7.11 ERA in 3 starts versus the Mets. Walker, 4 ERA, 6 games versus the Yankees. So better success there. I think Walker had a no-hitter into the 5th or 6th. It was broken on a home run.
Pitching well.
He was pitching very well. He's got great stuff. 2.55 ERA on the year. So Montgomery, he's rock solid. He had a crazy long stretch of giving up 3 or less. I think it's broke a bit recently, but 3.24 ERA on the year. That's a very good matchup. And that one can go, probably either way, and I wouldn't be surprised. Pitching deep into the game, that's huge for Walker because Montgomery typically doesn't go past the 6. So I think that's what you look at there. But Game 2 is where the Mets by far have the advantage in this specific series, and obviously a potential, Subway Series down the line in October. It looked nothing like this.
Yeah.
If Domingo Germán is starting a game versus Max Scherzer, you're going to have to lock me up because
that would be a problem.
Domingo Germán, who hasn't pitched in a few years, and I give him the only credit I'll give him, it's tough when your first 2 starts back in a year plus is Astros Mets. Those are 2 top 5 teams in baseball. But the fact that they're just throwing this, and I know Luis Severino, he's now out. Another injury that we haven't talked about recently for the Yankees. He's out, 5-6 weeks here.
That's a big loss, too.
Germán takes his spot in the rotation. 6 runs, 3 innings last time, 15 ERA. In that one start, there's no reason to start him in this game.
Yeah, because the Yankees pitching, when you mentioned Severino, it's been good within the 5 starters, but looking outside of that, there weren't a whole lot of options, I guess. And when you're sliding in Germán, that shows, I think, that obviously he's struggled this year, that the pitching rotation depth is a little thin, and we're seeing that now with Germán getting a big start against Max Scherzer. It's just not a good matchup for the Yanks.
And you saw Clark Schmidt pitch 3 innings yesterday, and he's getting built up because he was, a first-rounder, a starter, but there was no room in this rotation because everyone was pitching so well. But now, suddenly, 1 injury later, you have a hole. And Domingo Germán, it looks like he's a stopgap, but regardless, you're facing Max Scherzer on the other end. That's the last guy you want to face on this Mets team right now, and it's the number 1 pitcher on the entire staff outside of Aroldis Chapman. You want pitching a single pitch, let alone starting a game. So Mets have a huge advantage in Game 2, I think, when you look at it from that side of things. We talked about the offense, but they really should capitalize on that, especially when you have the Braves in the rearview mirror for now, and then facing them coming out of this series in a bit.
Yeah, I think Game 1 for the Mets will be big because if they can find a way to win that, difficult pitching matchup, I would say, or relatively even. Yeah, relatively even pitching matchup, you could say. If they can find a way to win that, and on Tuesday, that puts them in really good shape to sweep the Yankees, and then obviously head out on the road, and they have the Marlins coming up over the weekend, which is another good opportunity to maybe not gain ground on the Braves because they have I think they play the Diamondbacks, so another kind of easy team.
Do the Braves ever play anyone?
I know. I feel like it's always their schedule's always like, they play these terrible teams, and then they have the Phillies this week, which is decent. But, obviously all of it, I've talked about this before, all of it for the Mets is, I think, going to come down to that, big 5-game series against Atlanta to start August. They have another big series, on the road in Atlanta in August as well. So a couple huge series there. But, for now, I think the Mets, have a great opportunity to really capitalize on, like we mentioned, a very, Max Scherzer will, I think, pitch really well on Wednesday, 39 strikeouts, just 2 walks in July. So he's been really good since coming back from the IL and a serious advantage there. But overall, Ryan, I mean, looking at this series, I'm super excited to be with you covering Game 1. Awesome. That's going to be a ton of fun. It's also a great matchup, and I'm super excited for that. I'll be there for both, which I'm pumped for as well. But, the Subway Series also will bring a lot of fans, which is just a buzz and an energy, I think, and a playoff energy. I think, you could reasonably, there's been a lot of talk this year about a Subway Series, World Series, how awesome that would be for us personally, how awesome that would be for WFUV, and how awesome that would be for the city of New York. And I think this series will provide a little bit of a glimpse of the energy that I think you're going to see in a playoff game or in October baseball.
I truly don't think it's a hyperbole to say that this is the best both teams have came going into the Subway Series since the actual one in 2000. You look at it, the years that they've both made the playoffs, 2015, both wildcard teams. I know the Mets went on a run, but Yankees have been best record in baseball for a while now. Mets have been right behind them for a while now. So
at the time of playing the games, I think you're totally right. Both of the teams coming into it are in a great spot, are obviously, pushing towards not only just making the playoffs, but winning their division. Yes. Obviously the Yankees way, a little bit easier in that regard, but still, I mean, it's ultimately going to be an amazing series. Should be really, really fun. I'm super excited to cover it. And I think that's going to do it here for our pregame report here. Ryan Gregware and Sam Davis. Super excited. The Subway Series, Mets Yankees, Tuesday and Wednesday night. Stay tuned. We'll have plenty more content on the WFUV Sports Twitter and YouTube page from that series as a whole.